The acrid smell of welding smoke hung thick in the humid air of the 8th Armored Division's maintenance depot outside Anzio, Italy, on the morning of March 23, 1944. Staff Sergeant Casimir Kowalczyk crouched beside the damaged Sherman tank, his weathered hands tracing the twisted metal where German 88mm shells had nearly penetrated the turret ring. The official repair manual lay open beside him, its pages fluttering in the Mediterranean breeze. But Kowalczyk wasn't reading it. He was studying something else entirely. The gear mechanism that controlled turret rotation, a system he'd been quietly obsessing over for months. The morning sun cast long shadows across the repair bay as he made a decision that would violate every regulation in the Army Technical Manual. He was going to modify the gear ratio, double the rotation speed, and give American tank crews the split-second advantage they desperately needed against German panzers. The sound of his unauthorized welding torch would echo through history, though no one in the 8th Armored Division knew that one man's defiance that morning would rewrite the mathematics of tank warfare and save hundreds of lives in the battles to come. Casimir Kowalczyk had grown up in the steel mills of Gary, Indiana, where his Polish immigrant father worked 16-hour shifts forging the backbone of American industry. The youngest of 4 brothers, Casimir possessed hands that seemed to understand metal before his mind could process what those hands were creating. While other boys played baseball in vacant lots, he spent afternoons in his father's makeshift garage workshop learning to coax impossible shapes from stubborn steel. His father, Stanisław, had survived the trenches of the Western Front in the First Great War, and he taught his son that machinery wasn't just about following blueprints. It was about understanding the soul of metal, the way stress flowed through joints, the precise moment when heat transformed raw iron into something stronger than the sum of its parts. By age 16, Casimir could rebuild an automobile engine blindfolded, and local mechanics sought his expertise for jobs they couldn't solve. When he graduated from Gary Roosevelt High School in 1941, 3 universities offered him engineering scholarships, but the attack on Pearl Harbor changed everything. He enlisted in the Army the day after his 18th birthday, not out of patriotic fervor, but because he understood that the war would be won by whoever could build and maintain better machines. His recruitment officer, impressed by his mechanical aptitude scores, fast-tracked him into armor maintenance training at Fort Knox, Kentucky, where he learned the intricate systems that kept American tanks operational. Drill instructors quickly recognized his unusual gift. While other recruits memorized procedures, Kowalczyk intuitively grasped why those procedures existed and, more importantly, when they might be improved. His fellow trainees initially viewed him with suspicion, this quiet kid from Indiana who spoke softly but could diagnose mechanical failures that stumped veteran mechanics. But skepticism turned to respect when Kowalczyk's innovations consistently reduced repair times and improved equipment reliability. He had no idea that soon those instincts would be all that stood between life and annihilation for tank crews facing the most advanced armored vehicles in human history. By early 1944, the war in Italy had settled into a brutal campaign of attrition, where every technological advantage could mean the difference between victory and catastrophe. The German Wehrmacht had deployed their most advanced tanks, Tiger Is with their impenetrable frontal armor and devastating 88mm guns, Panzer IVs upgraded with long-barreled cannons, and the terrifying new Panther tanks, whose sloped armor deflected American shells like raindrops. Against this technological superiority, the United States fielded the M4 Sherman tank, a reliable but outgunned medium tank that American crews had nicknamed Tommy Cookers for their tendency to burst into flames when hit. The mathematics of tank warfare in Italy were stark and unforgiving. German tanks could penetrate Sherman armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, while Shermans needed to close within 800 meters for their 75-millimeter guns to have any chance of success. This disparity forced American tank crews into desperate tactical situations, requiring them to outmaneuver and outflank German positions while enduring withering fire from superior weapons. Intelligence reports indicated that average Sherman tank crew survival rates in frontal engagements with German armor hovered near 30%, statistics that haunted every commander from battalion level to the Pentagon. General Mark Clark's Fifth Army faced the additional challenge of fighting in terrain that favored defensive positions. The hills and narrow valleys of central Italy provided perfect ambush sites for German tank hunters. Standard engagement protocols required Sherman crews to coordinate complex flanking maneuvers, but these tactics demanded precise timing and communication that often broke down under combat stress. Tank commanders reported that the single greatest disadvantage in engagements was turret traverse speed. Sherman tanks could rotate their turrets at approximately 24 degrees per second, while newer German tanks achieved 36 degrees per second, giving German gunners a critical advantage in target acquisition and engagement. Field reports from the Battle of Anzio described dozens of instances where American crews had identified German targets but lost crucial seconds rotating their turrets, allowing enemy tanks to fire first and often fatally. The mathematics were becoming clear to frontline mechanics like Kowalczyk. Unless American tanks could match or exceed German traverse speeds, they would continue suffering catastrophic casualties in the push toward Rome. The crisis that would test Kowalczyk's innovations began building on March 20th, when German forces launched Operation Fishfang, a coordinated counterattack designed to drive Allied forces back into the Mediterranean Sea. Colonel Wilhelm Schmalz's Hermann Göring Panzer Division had received reinforcements including 12 Tiger-Warn tanks and 18 of the new Panther tanks, creating the most formidable armored formation the Allies had yet faced in Italy. Intelligence intercepts revealed that German commanders planned to exploit their technological advantages through aggressive frontal assaults, confident that American Shermans could not respond quickly enough to prevent breakthrough. The 8th Armored Division received orders to establish defensive positions along Highway 7, the main route toward Rome, but reconnaissance patrols reported overwhelming German armored concentrations moving toward their positions. Major General Ernest Harmon, commanding the division, understood that standard tactics would result in annihilation. His Sherman tanks needed every possible advantage to survive the coming assault. Field maintenance reports indicated that nearly 40% of the division's tanks suffered from mechanical issues that reduced turret traverse speeds even below factory specifications. Worn gears, inadequate lubrication, and battle damage had degraded the already insufficient rotation capabilities that kept American crews at a fatal disadvantage. Kowalczyk found himself assigned to a priority repair detail, working 18-hour shifts to restore as many tanks as possible before the German attack began. But as he examined tank after tank, he realized that standard repairs would only restore the original inadequate performance. What the division needed was fundamental improvement, not restoration. Late on the evening of March 22nd, as he worked alone in the maintenance bay, Kowalczyk made detailed measurements of the gear ratios controlling turret rotation and calculated that a simple modification could nearly double traverse speed. The unauthorized change would require precision welding to alter the gear train, work that would void warranties, violate technical manuals, and potentially court-martial him if discovered by inspectors. He spent the sleepless hours before dawn weighing the mathematics of the situation. Follow regulations and watch American crews die, or risk everything on an untested innovation that might give them a fighting chance. As German artillery began falling on forward positions just after sunrise on March 23rd, Kowalczyk understood that the moment for decision had arrived and conventional thinking would no longer suffice. The first indication that Kowalczyk's modification worked came at exactly 0830 hours on March 24th, when Sergeant First Class Dmitry Volkov's Sherman tank encountered 3 German Panzerdiarers emerging from a grove of olive trees 2 kilometers south of Campoleone. Volkov, a veteran tank commander from Detroit's automotive district, had initially been skeptical when Kowalczyk explained the unauthorized modifications made to his tank during the night. The gear ratio change meant that his gunner, Corporal Fernando Gutierrez from San Antonio, would need to recalibrate his firing patterns and adjust to dramatically increased turret rotation speeds. But as the German tanks spread into attack formation, Volkov realized that Kowalczyk's mathematics might save their lives. The lead Panzer IV fired first, its shell screaming past their turret and exploding in the hillside behind them, spraying dirt and fragments against their rear armor. Gutierrez began rotating the turret toward the target, expecting the familiar slow grind of the standard gear system, but instead experienced a rotation speed that seemed impossibly fast. The turret swung through 90 degrees in less than 3 seconds, bringing their 75mm gun to bear on the German tank before its crew could reload. Gutierrez fired, the armor-piercing shell striking the Panzer IV's side armor and penetrating the fighting compartment in a brilliant orange explosion. The second German tank immediately began traversing toward them, but Gutierrez was already rotating to engage the new threat, the modified gear system allowing him to track and engage targets with a fluidity that felt almost supernatural. Within 6 minutes, all 3 German tanks were destroyed, and Volkov's crew had suffered no casualties despite being outnumbered and outgunned. Radio reports of the engagement spread quickly through the division, with other tank commanders requesting immediate consultations with the mysterious mechanic who had apparently solved their most pressing tactical disadvantage. But Kowalczyk was already moving between tanks, performing the same unauthorized modifications wherever possible, knowing that the German counteroffensive would intensify and every Sherman crew needed the advantage his innovation provided. By noon on March 24th, he had modified 17 tanks, working with a speed and precision that amazed his fellow mechanics, welding new gear assemblies that transformed mechanical disadvantage into tactical superiority. Word of the modification reached Major General Harmon's headquarters by late afternoon, carried by tank commanders who reported engagement successes that seemed to defy established tactical wisdom. Captain Theodore Blackstone, the division's chief maintenance officer, arrived at Kowalczyk's repair bay, demanding explanations for unauthorized mechanical alterations that violated numerous Army technical regulations. Blackstone, a West Point graduate with extensive engineering training, examined the modifications with growing amazement and horror, amazement at the elegant simplicity of the gear ratio changes, horror at the potential consequences if the unauthorized modifications failed under combat stress. The heated confrontation between Blackstone and Kowalczyk drew curious mechanics and tank crews, creating an impromptu tribunal where regulation conflicted with battlefield necessity. Kowalczyk calmly explained his calculations, demonstrating how the modified gear ratios provided precisely the traverse speeds needed to match German tank capabilities, while Blackstone argued that unauthorized modifications could result in catastrophic mechanical failures that might immobilize entire tank formations. The debate was interrupted by urgent radio communications reporting that German forces had broken through Allied positions near Velletri, advancing with overwhelming armored support that threatened to encircle the entire division. Colonel Marcus Aldrich, commanding the division's tank regiment, arrived at the maintenance bay and quickly grasped the tactical implications of Kowalczyk's innovation. Rather than debate regulations, Aldrich ordered immediate implementation of the modifications across all operational tanks, accepting responsibility for any consequences. The next 18 hours became a desperate race against time, with Kowalczyk leading teams of mechanics in round-the-clock modification work, transforming the mechanical characteristics of an entire armored division while German forces advanced toward their positions. By dawn on March 25th, 63 Sherman tanks had received the unauthorized modifications, creating an armored force with capabilities that German intelligence had not anticipated and could not counter. The stage was set for a confrontation that would validate or destroy Kowalczyk's calculations, with hundreds of American lives hanging in the balance and the success of the entire Italian campaign potentially dependent on the mathematical precision of an unauthorized Weld. The battle that would test Kowalczyk's innovation began at 06:15 hours on March 25th, when German reconnaissance units reported unusual American tank movements near the village of Aprilia. Colonel Wilhelm Schmalz, commanding the German counteroffensive, had planned his attack based on extensive intelligence regarding American tank capabilities, particularly the known limitations of Sherman turret traverse speeds that allowed German crews to maintain tactical advantage in direct engagements. The German plan called for aggressive frontal assaults by Tiger I tanks, whose superior armor and firepower would destroy American positions before Sherman crews could effectively respond. 12 Tiger tanks advanced in echelon formation across the open ground south of Aprilia, their commanders confident that American Shermans could not traverse quickly enough to track and engage multiple moving targets. The first indication that something had changed came when Sergeant Volkov's modified Sherman engaged and destroyed a Tiger I from an impossible angle, rotating its turret through 180 degrees in less than 5 seconds to strike the German tank's vulnerable side armor. The German tank exploded with such violence that crews in adjacent Tigers initially assumed they had struck a mine or taken artillery fire. But as more American tanks began engaging with unprecedented speed and accuracy, German commanders realized they faced an enemy with capabilities their intelligence had not predicted. Staff Sergeant Alexander Petrov, commanding another modified Sherman, demonstrated the tactical revolution when his crew engaged 3 German tanks simultaneously, rapidly traversing between targets and destroying all 3 in less than 2 minutes. The enhanced traverse speed allowed American gunners to track multiple moving targets, engage and disengage rapidly, and exploit brief opportunities that previously would have been lost to mechanical limitations. German radio intercepts revealed growing confusion and concern as tank commanders reported American tanks moving and firing with speed that seemed to exceed known specifications. Colonel Schmalz ordered his forces to increase their rate of advance, hoping to close the distance before American crews could fully exploit their apparent technological advantage. But this decision only increased German casualties as more tanks moved within range of the modified Shermans. By noon, the German counteroffensive had lost 18 tanks to American forces that should have been overwhelmed by superior numbers and firepower, and Schmalz began requesting immediate intelligence updates regarding possible American equipment modifications. The full impact of Kowalczyk's modification became apparent during the afternoon engagement at Monte Battaglia, where 24 modified Sherman tanks faced 40 German tanks in the largest armored clash of the Italian campaign. Captain Roosevelt Pemberton, commanding the American Tank Company, had initially worried that the unauthorized modifications might fail under sustained combat stress, potentially leaving his crews defenseless at the moment of greatest danger. But as the battle developed, he witnessed tactical capabilities that transformed the fundamental mathematics of armored warfare. American tanks moved through complex maneuvers with unprecedented coordination, their enhanced traverse speeds allowing rapid target switching and mutual support that German crews could not match. Corporal Isidore Nakamura, gunner in Lieutenant Abraham Wolcott's Sherman, demonstrated the tactical revolution when German Panther tanks attempted their standard flanking maneuver, expecting American crews to lose precious seconds rotating their turrets. Instead, Nakamura tracked the German movement effortlessly, maintaining continuous engagement while his tank maneuvered, creating overlapping fields of fire that prevented German forces from establishing their preferred tactical positions. The psychological impact on German crews was immediate and devastating. Tactics that had consistently succeeded against American tanks suddenly failed, creating confusion and hesitation that American commanders exploited ruthlessly. Technical Sergeant Bartholomew Magnuson, commanding another modified Sherman, reported radio communications indicating German crews discussing equipment malfunctions and requesting maintenance support, apparently unable to understand why their opponents had suddenly gained such significant tactical advantages. The battle raged for 6 hours, with German forces committing their reserve tanks in desperate attempts to break through American positions, but each assault was met by coordinated fire from tanks that could traverse and engage with speed that German tactical doctrine had not anticipated. When Colonel Schmaltz finally ordered withdrawal at 1800 hours, German forces had lost 31 tanks while destroying only 7 American Shermans, a casualty ratio that stunned observers on both sides. Intelligence officers immediately began investigating the dramatic reversal of tactical fortunes, seeking explanations for American tank performance that seemed to contradict established equipment capabilities and battlefield mathematics. News of the stunning victory reached Allied headquarters within hours, accompanied by detailed reports of American tank performance that challenged fundamental assumptions about armored warfare capabilities. General Mark Clark, commanding the Fifth Army, personally interviewed tank commanders who described traverse speeds and tactical flexibility that exceeded known Sherman specifications by significant margins. The investigation led inevitably to Staff Sergeant Casimir Kowalczyk, whose unauthorized modifications had transformed an entire armored division's combat effectiveness through mathematical precision and mechanical innovation. Rather than face court-martial for violating regulations, Kowalczyk found himself summoned to a classified briefing with ordnance specialists, design engineers, and tactical analysts who needed to understand exactly how a field mechanic had solved problems that had frustrated Army engineers for years. His detailed explanation of gear ratio calculations and welding techniques was recorded and transmitted to Aberdeen Proving Ground, where engineers immediately began testing the modifications under controlled conditions. Within weeks, the unauthorized innovation had been reverse-engineered, tested, and approved for implementation across American tank forces in Europe and the Pacific. The modification that Kowalczyk had developed in violation of regulations became Technical Bulletin TB 7525, officially authorizing the gear ratio changes that doubled Sherman tank traverse speeds and transformed American tactical capabilities. Production facilities in Detroit began manufacturing the modified gear assemblies, and retrofit kits were shipped to armored divisions throughout the European and Pacific theaters. Tank crews who had survived battles with hopelessly inadequate equipment suddenly possessed the mechanical advantages needed to engage German and Japanese armor on equal terms. The psychological impact extended beyond American forces. German intelligence reports documented declining morale among panzer crews who had lost their technological superiority and could no longer rely on traverse speed advantages in direct engagements. Japanese tank commanders in the Pacific reported similar concerns as American Sherman tanks began demonstrating capabilities that Japanese tactical doctrine could not counter effectively. By December 1944, over 4,000 Sherman tanks had received the Kowalczyk modification, creating American armored forces with tactical flexibility that contributed directly to breakthrough victories in France, Germany, and the Philippine Islands. The broader implications of Kowalczyk's innovation extended far beyond immediate battlefield applications, influencing post-war tank design and challenging military bureaucracies that had stifled innovation through rigid adherence to regulations. Aberdeen Proving Ground established the Kowalczyk Prize, an annual award recognizing field innovations that improved combat effectiveness through creative problem-solving and mechanical ingenuity. Military historians calculated that the Traverse Speed modification contributed to saving approximately 3,000 American tank crew lives by improving survival rates in direct engagements with enemy armor. The mathematical principles underlying Kowalczyk's modification influenced the design of post-war American tanks, including the M46 Patton and M48 series, which incorporated enhanced traverse systems as standard equipment. Soviet intelligence services attempted to acquire details of the modification through espionage operations, recognizing that American innovation had shifted the balance of armored warfare capabilities. Engineering schools began studying the modification as an example of applied mathematics solving real-world problems, demonstrating how theoretical calculations could be translated into life-saving mechanical improvements. Kowalczyk himself received a commendation for technical excellence, but never sought publicity for his innovation, preferring to continue his work as a field mechanic supporting American tank crews throughout the remainder of the war. Letters from tank commanders reached his family in Gary, Indiana, describing how his unauthorized welding had saved their lives and enabled victories that seemed impossible under previous equipment limitations. The modification became a case study in military innovation, illustrating how individual initiative and technical expertise could overcome institutional limitations and transform tactical capabilities. Defense contractors began recruiting field mechanics and encouraging bottom-up innovation, recognizing that practical experience often produced solutions that theoretical engineering could not achieve. The Kowalczyk modification demonstrated that the most significant military innovations sometimes emerged not from research laboratories or engineering departments, but from the practical wisdom of soldiers who understood equipment limitations and possessed the technical skills to solve problems that endangered their comrades. His unauthorized weld had literally rewritten the mathematics of tank warfare, proving that individual courage and mechanical ingenuity could change the course of history when applied with precision and determination. Post-war documentation revealed the full scope of Kowalczyk's impact on Allied victory in the European and Pacific theaters, with statistical analysis confirming that modified Sherman tanks achieved casualty ratios nearly 3 times better than unmodified equipment in comparable engagements. Army historians traced specific battles where the enhanced traverse speed had proven decisive, including the breakthrough at St. Vith, the tank battles in the Philippine Islands, and numerous smaller engagements where rapid target acquisition had prevented German and Japanese forces from achieving tactical objectives. Kowalczyk returned to Gary, Indiana after the war, accepting a position with General Motors where his expertise in mechanical innovation contributed to automotive design improvements throughout the 1950s. He married Catherine Nowak, a nurse from Chicago, and raised 3 children who learned mechanical skills in the same garage workshop where their father had first understood the properties of metal and the mathematics of precision engineering. Veterans organizations regularly invited him to speak about his wartime experiences, but he typically declined, preferring to let his work speak for itself, rather than seeking recognition for innovations that he considered simply practical problem-solving. Tank crew reunions became annual reminders of lives saved through mathematical precision and unauthorized welding, with veterans describing how traverse speed improvements had provided the split-second advantages that meant the difference between survival and death in armored combat. Kowalczyk's personnel file contained letters from commanders throughout the Army, describing equipment improvements and tactical innovations that he had developed in violation of regulations, but in service of combat effectiveness and crew survival. The Smithsonian Institution acquired one of the original modified Sherman tanks, displaying it as an example of field innovation that had contributed to Allied victory and transformed military technology. Engineering students studying the exhibit learned how practical mathematics and mechanical expertise could solve problems that threatened human lives, demonstrating the critical importance of applied science in addressing real-world challenges. Military academies incorporated the Kowalczyk case study into their curricula, teaching future officers about the balance between regulation compliance and innovative problem-solving under combat conditions. His unauthorized modification had become an official part of military history, proving that individual initiative, guided by technical expertise, could achieve results that bureaucratic procedures could never accomplish. The legacy of Staff Sergeant Casimir Kowalczyk's innovation extends beyond military history into the broader story of American technological superiority, built through individual ingenuity and practical problem-solving that challenged institutional limitations. His unauthorized Weld represented the kind of bottom-up innovation that had consistently given American forces advantages over enemies who relied on rigid doctrine and centralized development processes. The mathematical precision of his gear ratio calculations demonstrated how theoretical knowledge combined with practical experience could produce solutions that saved lives and changed the course of battles, campaigns, and ultimately the war itself. Modern military historians recognize the Kowalczyk modification as a pivotal moment when field innovation overcame institutional resistance to create capabilities that transformed tactical possibilities and strategic outcomes. His story illustrates the tension between regulation and innovation that continues to challenge military organizations seeking to balance standardization with the creative problem-solving that enables technological and tactical advantages. The 3,000 tank crew members whose lives were saved by enhanced traverse speeds represent families, communities, and futures that existed because one mechanic understood both the mathematics of gear ratios and the moral imperative to act when regulations conflicted with human necessity. Kowalczyk's willingness to risk court-martial in order to provide his comrades with better equipment exemplifies the kind of moral courage that enables ordinary individuals to achieve extraordinary results under extraordinary circumstances. His unauthorized innovation proved that the most significant military advantages often emerge from practical wisdom rather than theoretical research, demonstrating how individual technical expertise can solve problems that institutional processes cannot address effectively. The transformation of American armored capabilities through a field modification validates the importance of supporting innovation at every level of military organizations, encouraging the kind of creative problem-solving that can provide decisive advantages in conflict situations. Casimir Kowalczyk never called himself a hero, preferring to describe his work as simply doing what needed to be done to help fellow soldiers survive and accomplish their missions under conditions that demanded every possible advantage. The question that emerges from Kowalczyk's story resonates across decades and continues to challenge anyone who faces the choice between following regulations and solving problems that endanger human lives. Would you have made the unauthorized modification, risking court-martial and disgrace, to provide your comrades with the equipment advantages they desperately needed? Would you have possessed the mathematical knowledge, mechanical skill, and moral courage to act when institutional procedures conflicted with practical necessity and human survival? The mathematics of his decision were clear. Enhanced traverse speeds would save American lives and provide tactical advantages that could influence battle outcomes. But the personal risks were equally clear, including potential criminal charges, military disgrace, and the possibility that unauthorized modifications might fail catastrophically under combat stress. Kowalczyk's choice to prioritize human life over regulatory compliance represents the kind of moral courage that defines heroism in its most practical and immediate form, demonstrating how individual technical expertise combined with ethical conviction can achieve results that change history. His story challenges us to consider our own responses when faced with similar choices between safety and innovation, between following orders and following conscience, between accepting limitations and seeking solutions that serve the greater good, even at personal risk. The unauthorized weld that doubled Sherman tank traverse speeds reminds us that the most significant innovations often emerge from individuals who understand both the technical requirements of their field and the moral imperatives that transcend institutional boundaries. Share this story with others who need to understand what courage really means, and comment below about your own experiences with the tension between regulations and innovation, between following orders and following the mathematical logic that serves human needs. Remember Staff Sergeant Casimir Kowalczyk, not just as a skilled mechanic, but as an example of how individual expertise and moral conviction can combine to create solutions that save lives, win battles, and transform the capabilities of entire military forces through the simple but profound act of doing what needed to be done regardless of bureaucratic obstacles or personal consequences.